Citizen Kane's good and all, but it's no Citizen Kane. Wait. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1941 drama, Citizen Kane. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Citizen Kane stars Orson Welles, Joseph Cotten, and Dorothy Comingore, and was directed by Orson Welles as his directorial debut. It tells the life story of newspaper mogul Charles Foster Kane, played by Orson Welles, as a reporter tries to uncover the meaning behind Kane's last words. Citizen Kane is a cinematic monolith. It's frequently cited as the greatest film ever made, and tops the favorites lists of countless directors, actors, and critics. In film circles, it's all but universally regarded as a masterpiece. The masterpiece. In its nearly 80-year history, this film has been critiqued, praised, analyzed, reviewed, and reevaluated by just about every person who has ever had anything to do with film. The cinematography, script, meaning, and auteur directing by Orson Welles have all been discussed ad nauseum at this point. So I don't think there's really all that much that I can say about this movie that hasn't already been said, at least from a criticism standpoint. So instead of jumping right into analyzation and praise, I want to start by explaining my personal history with this film a bit, because I've gone through quite a journey with it over the years. So I've seen this movie a lot of times, far more than I actually wanted to. The first time I watched this cinematic great was in my high school cinematography class. I already knew of the film's stature and was actually really excited to watch it, but that first viewing wasn't entertainment. It was a lesson. It took several days to get through it, pausing every few minutes to analyze the dissolves, the pans, the lighting, test it on the metaphors and the cinematography, and the history of the feud with William Randolph Hearst. I had finally seen the so-called greatest film ever made, but it sure didn't feel like it. This process was repeated in one form or another several more times over the next few years. We watched it in advanced cinematography, and then again in my high school film criticism class. I was once again reminded of the awe-inspiring majesty of this film in college, first in my history of film class, and then again in film criticism. Always stopping and starting, pausing to discuss and analyze. Homework and tests were all this movie was to me. With each watch, I was taught and retaught all the little tidbits and facts about the production and history of Citizen Kane, expected to recall all the metaphors and unique feats of cinematography, and expected to be inspired by it. I'll admit, having the consensus that this was the greatest film of all time shoved down my throat at every turn left me a bit bitter. I didn't get it at all. It was a dull non-story about a half-imaginary man that I couldn't care less about. Shrill actresses, frequently overacted scenes, and a plodding pace didn't help either. I even bought the DVD soon after those classes, just so I could watch it all the way through in a single, uninterrupted sitting for the first time ever, but I was still left underwhelmed and disappointed, even on my 6th viewing. I didn't think about this movie for several years after that. It was about 5 years later that I bought the Blu-ray and decided to give it another try. It wasn't for a class or a grade or because somebody else wanted to watch it. I watched it because I looked at that Blu-ray cover and thought, why not? And that, I think, made all the difference. Suddenly, the story was actually interesting. Maybe it was because I was in the right mood, maybe it was because I was at home and not sitting in a lecture hall, maybe it was because I didn't have to analyze the minutia of every other scene, but for the first time, I actually enjoyed Citizen Kane. And it only took 7 watches to get there. Luckily, I've been able to stay at the same level on subsequent rewatches. As much as I hate to admit it, I think my enjoyment is actually heightened by some of that background and facts that I picked up from all those educational viewings. The opening sequence is somehow more impactful, knowing that the window would remain in the same position the whole time. The thinly veiled connections to William Randolph Hearst and the surrounding controversy make the film seem more bold than it otherwise would have. And of course, knowing the final secret going into the film changes how you perceive much of the story. Citizen Kane isn't a film that can be casually watched, at least not during your first time or two. It's not a difficult movie to understand, but it requires your full attention. It's a dense, dialogue-heavy film that jumps around in time with intentionally inconsistent pacing. Some scenes drag on with sparse dialogue and incredibly long takes, while other sequences exude frenetic energy with witty one-liners or quick-cut montage editing. With that kind of contrast, it can be easy to start to lose focus in the slower moments. But because of the structure of this film, losing focus like that, even for a little bit, all but destroys any hope of following along in an invested state. This is a non-linear story. We begin at the end. Charles Foster Kane's end, at least. Through an expositionary, superficial newsreel, we get an overview of the life of the man we're about to focus on for the next 2 hours. But it's emotionless biographical tabloid, a regurgitation of facts, and a treatise on the wealth, excess, and success of Kane. It tells us what he did, but not who he was. So the rest of the film sets out to figure that out as we follow a reporter investigating the meaning of Kane's last words. And the story of Kane's life is told in time-jumping flashback, conveyed to us through a series of interviews with those who had been close to him. It's a really unique way of approaching the story, because we're learning about who Kane was, but it's all told through memory and thoughts of other people. Some consider themselves to be his friends, but others have more complicated relationships, and don't even try to conceal their animosity. So it introduces this unreliability to our understanding of who Kane was. In fact, our only glimpse of the true Kane is at the very beginning of the film, when he speaks his final words. Everything else is just parts of the whole. Pieces of the truth, clouded by time and skewed by personal feelings. We get a general sense of who Kane was by the end, but never truly get a full picture of the man. Which brings us to the mystery of Rosebud. The film may be 79 years old, but don't worry, I'm not going to reveal the meaning of Kane's final words, so no spoilers here. But I do want to talk about the presence of the mystery and its importance. The whole movie is predicated on this mystery. Everything we learn about Kane is revealed through the reporter's attempts to find some clue about the meaning of Rosebud. And so, at first glance, Rosebud can be viewed as sort of a MacGuffin, this piece of information that's continuously being sought after while really serving the true purpose of providing an excuse for telling the story of Kane. And it really does seem like that's all Rosebud is through most of this movie, right up until the final moments. But we do eventually see that it wasn't just a plot device. It turns out to be very important, giving us key insight into Kane that no interview ever did. In the end, Kane himself is the only one who ever tells us who he actually was. So my journey with Citizen Kane was a long one. It took more than a half dozen viewings to feel anything more positive than apathy for the film. But even though I would say that I legitimately like it now, I will never consider Citizen Kane to be the greatest film ever made. I will, however, acknowledge its importance and continue to be impressed by the cinematic feats and attention to detail. It's remarkable that this was Orson Welles' directorial debut. He was only 26 years old, yet he produced, co-wrote, directed, and starred in what would become one of the most important and highly acclaimed films of all time. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the structure. I don't think this movie would have worked nearly as well if it had been told like a straightforward fictional biography. The non-linear flashback style works really well, and the interview memory recounting narrative is perfect for the story. First of all, this is supposed to be telling us about a man's entire life. As is fittingly brought up in the film, how do you condense that into a single movie? The answer is, you don't. But you can compile a series of other people's memories to create an outline of that man's life. This flashback memory style further serves the story by highlighting the juxtaposition between Kane's mythical public persona and the perception of who he was by those who were closest to him, with neither viewpoint truly capturing the whole. The second pro is the cinematography. I know I didn't talk about it much in the main section of this review, but that's really only because there's nothing I could add to that conversation that hasn't been said by every other person who's talked about Citizen Kane in the last 8 decades. The cinematography is just phenomenal. Thanks to my years of watching this movie in classes, I think I appreciate it a bit more than I otherwise would have. The lighting, the framing of shots, the use of mirrors and long takes, the camera movement, the transitions like the rainy skylight dissolve. Not only is it all technically impressive, but it all conveys meaning too, providing further insight into Charles Kane and his relationship with others. On the con side, my biggest issue is how self-indulgent this movie is. It's so grand and lofty, and it's very much aware of that fact. I hate throwing the word pretentious around when talking about movies, since it's an overused and generally vague criticism, but it really fits this one. Certainly the hype and over-enthusiastic praise this movie's garnered contributes to that feeling a bit, but even setting that aside, this movie puts off that kind of air. It's as decadent and excessive as its title character, and while it works for the story, it definitely makes it difficult to connect with on a more personal level. The second con's pretty minor, but the old age makeup is a bit rough, most notably for Kane himself. This movie shows us about 80 years of the man's life, and Orson Welles plays him for 55 or so of those years. Since Welles was only 26 years old at the time, this meant that he had to be aged up over the course of the film. To be fair, I think most of the makeup was pretty good, including middle-aged Kane. It's only in the later scenes of Kane as an old man that the makeup sometimes takes on an unmoving artificiality. It's not a huge deal or anything, but it always stands out to me in the lead-up to the ever-silly room trashing scene. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Citizen Kane or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Citizen Kane 3.5 out of 5 paws. This is such a layered movie, with so much to the story and cinematography and characters, but it's also a cold, distant film. It's intentional, mirroring Kane himself, but it makes it so that I can never connect with it beyond admiration, or enjoy it beyond its technical merits. I would recommend Citizen Kane to people who want to watch a lofty and layered story about greed, excess, politics, and memories. It's a bit dense, and certainly slow at times, but ultimately an interesting fictional biography. If you're interested in the technical side of films, there should be plenty for you to like here, especially the cinematography. I do have a bit of advice though for anybody watching it for the first time. Don't burden yourself with the idea that it's the greatest film ever made. The hype will either ruin it for you or skew your feelings on it due to all the pressure. Just go in ready to pay attention. If you liked Citizen Kane, I would recommend Mank. This one might be the most obvious of the recommendations, but it's a biopic drama about Herman J. Mankiewicz, the screenwriter of Citizen Kane. It focuses on Mank's writing of the script and the production of the film, all while emulating the early 40s filming style. If you want another great film about a man's life, you should check out It's a Wonderful Life. Although generally classified as a Christmas movie, only a small section of the story actually relates to the holiday. Instead, it's mostly a flashback telling of the life of George Bailey, the antithesis of Charles Kane. And if you really like the grandeur of this film and want another technically impressive story of a man's life, I would suggest Lawrence of Arabia. It has some structure elements that were clearly inspired by Citizen Kane and is another quite self-indulgent, critically acclaimed film. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Citizen Kane? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's a movie that took you several viewings to finally enjoy? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.